Hello, Hexen Circle Initiates, and welcome back to our Artifact Lore series. New regions mean new artifact sets, and Fontaine is no different. While there are plenty of sets still waiting to be covered, this one in particular has been piquing my curiosity as of late. The Golden Troupe set is packed full of lore about the history of Fontaine before the Hydro Archon's reign, and as such, I thought it'd be a good start to disentangling the many threads of its lore. Also, it dawned on me that we'd only ever covered one full artifact set in the past, and there's so much lore and so many stories hidden in them that that's just a shame. Theory crafting in Fontaine has upped both in depth and the difficulty. Remuria's timeline has been hard for me to get my head around, but we're gonna do our best. The webs are so tangled that nearly every historical figure is somehow relevant to every other, and so on and so forth, in ways that Genshin Impact hasn't really done before. That said, this style of storytelling is so very Hoyoverse, and they tend to do this a lot with Honkai Impact 3rd and Star Rail 2. It's honestly my favorite thing about their style of subtle storytelling. You, the reader or consumer, are expected to understand these things and piece them together yourselves, rather than being told exactly what happened. It's good brain exercise, but can be difficult for people not schooled in media analysis. Even the sharpest brain might struggle to make these connections or miss a crucial bit of information here or there. I'm no different. While this style of storytelling has made Fontaine's historical lore a little bit convoluted, it's also made it one of the most dense and fulfilling for following leads, in my opinion. From my own experience in story crafting, I can say it isn't easy to lay out a story on the board where everything, and I mean everything, is thought out and connected without the overarching tale becoming contrived and difficult to understand. The writers at Hoyoverse seem to have this skill in spades, however, and I trust them, though this is one of those things that always comes down to personal taste as well. Anyway, here I will give my blanket spoiler warning for the Fontaine Archon quests up to 4.2, along with subsequent world quests. To save time, I also will often assume you have basic ground floor understanding of other lore about the world of Teyvat's prehistory, which we cover extensively in our other videos. Remember that my style of theory crafting is, rather than trying to champion my own theory or premise, to focus on presenting in-game information and occasionally real-life related history and myth in order to give you new things to think about so that you can draw your own conclusions. I'm the humble scribe of the Hexen Circle, Ganymede, and today I'll be your guide to the lore of the artifact set, the Golden Troupe. Golden Song's Variation. A flower constructed out of clam, mother of pearl, and gold leaf. It blooms proudly. The song of fate once wound through the waterways, spreading the harmonious melody of civilization and order. Wherever the notes fell, brutality was replaced by enlightenment, and disordered primordial land had all but been completely transformed. The mighty sea wind rolled across, and the rootless water lilies floated along with it. In a tribal dwelling as short-lived as seagrass, a young musician met a warrior. Amidst the poems of conquest that are as many as the stars themselves, this song is not that noteworthy, but the waves bore witness to the friendship between the warriors and also foretold their end. The young musician had yet to be rid of the vulgar passions of the barbarians and became fast friends with the servant, one of the conquered. The servant's name no one remembers, but in later days, the moniker Cassiodor would become famous the world over. Later, the young warrior would follow the youthful musician to Golden Capitolium, the highest city in the Golden Capital. There, they completed the rigorous courses and trials and were elevated by the Golden God King to become prideful masters. Pride blooms upon the breast of the citizens of the glorious kingdom as a golden flower. No more poverty or savagery shall there be beneath the God King's sweeping gaze. Pride is the shield of the realm's honor, and it is the spear tip with auric radiance. It defends the God King's unsurpassed authority. Only under the command of such authority can order be born, and where order reigns, art and beauty can bloom free. In the beautiful golden land, weakness, folly, and savagery will never be accepted or defended. Such things may submit or be destroyed. My friend, my brother, do not hanker for that impoverished past, and let not your mind linger on the false, lowly dignity of those peoples of bygone times. You have forsaken that simple body and feeble spirit. and you have become as pure as steel. Why lament the little things so? My friend, my brother, listen to that unchanging melody, the clockwork rhythm of your innermost heart. Thus does the God King whisper to you. The glorious kingdom has eyes only for the perfect world of the future, and this future will, for the people of bygone times, play the final song for their inevitable destruction. Golden birds shedding. A gold feather made using silver and gold filigree. A crystal clear sapphire is mounted atop it. When the sea breeze ebbed, the pink glow of dusk suffused the skies. The seabirds never tarry where the 1,000 masts are anchored, leaving only scattered feathers in their wake. The once harmonious and magnificent symphony had its closing moment, just as no empire may rule in peace forever. As the waters expanded, power brought not only progress and order, but arrogance, violence, and exploitation also. In the distant city of the people of bygone times, in the valley of the hidden exiles, even at the foot of Mount Capitolium, the noble musicians who turned the strains and the army of iron in glimmering mail came to take everything from the people. Those who were yet unconquered, and the mighty who had yet to have a drop of water taken from them, banded together, swearing to resist to the last. It is as I feared, and it is as I mourned, my brother. While you sang on high, you should have heard the voices of the lowly also. Not all would willingly see their homes and nature stolen from them. Not all can accept our melody. You once called them the people of bygone times, brother, but even those who pledge loyalty to the past have determination and dignity that cannot be lightly ignored. We once thought to conquer and dominate others, but how could the glory of our radiant kingdom? Weakness! Weakness! That craven compassion of yours darkens your mind. It has made your heart soft. It has become an exposed weak spot on your back. Should barbarism and ignorance yet linger in Fontaine, poisoning any of its waters, we shall exterminate them. If the savages should wish to join our majestic golden order, then we shall accept them, just as our glorious lord accepted us. But since Bane Dragon Skyla destroyed our towers and slaughtered our musicians, the envenomed feral tribes are no longer worth saving or accepting. And since they are unworthy, they must be purged from the soil and the waters, just as we purged pestilence and wildfires from the land. It was at this very moment that the Golden Era suddenly ceased, plunging down into ceaseless war and rebellion. The throne chamber was filled with cries of conquest and destruction and the agony of the barbarian tribes, and the God King awoke, startled. Golden Era's Prelude. This lovely sundial is inlaid with silver and gold. It seems that time has stopped flowing atop its dial plate. The sea breeze at dawn, rapturous and free, sings this ancient hymn. Time flowed forward no longer, but returned to the past with the singer. Along the waters it flowed, passing the gilded domes of the glorious kingdom. On the soft summer wind, it passed through the green manor ringed by towering walls. Whether aristocrats in their light ships, or barbarians brought as captives, all were intoxicated by the music of a beautiful age, immersed in the memories. For this was the golden world of abundance, an era of a righteous, glorious king. I came from a puny realm on a lone isle. I was born in a hut, and I grew up in a village built of reeds and grass. When the warriors in their bright mail came to my home, they announced the news of conquest. I was but a mere youth, and I naively followed these towering demigods to the capital. It was by dint of my agile fingers and bright voice that I evaded the fate of bondage. Only after the God King recognized me did I first witness the might of civilization and order. Let my flesh and bone then be utterly changed. Let my name and tribe be forsaken. The world shall know only the name Boethius. And thus was the child born of barbarism moved by the Golden Palace, and became a servant of a majestic authority. Like one newborn, he worked to abandon the ancient savage customs and devoured new knowledge. All he did to transform himself into a person of true honor and glory, into a part of this great civilization. For nothing else did he toil, for this was the golden world of abundance, an era of a righteous, glorious king enthroned. Golden Night's Bustle. An ancient silver urn that was once filled with fine wine as red as rubies, now it contains nothing but bitter seawater. The peaceful sea surged, sending the ship sliding between the silent manor and the temple. Under the pale moonlight, the golden dome that had seemed so glorious in daytime lost its luster. The God King awoke with a start from his majestic dream. The clear starlight had fled. Violence and estrangement formed a darkness deeper than darkness, shrouding the great dome. In terror and remorse did he summon to him his most loyal guards and most attuned musicians, and he gave them his final orders, intending to bring peace back to the fractured lands. Yet just as a flood unleashed cannot be held back, the deeply ingrained arrogance and prejudice could not be reversed in a night, and crushed the Harmosts and the rulers. All the noble sacrifices, all the unselfish plans, all fell to ruin at the hands of the wicked, and all came crashing down in the end. Whether the barbaric armies of the fell Dragon Prince, or the God King determined to the last to save the Empire, they were swept away by an inexorable storm. Even the luxurious palace and the jade green manor were consigned to destruction together. Without the guiding golden song, the once noble people of the glorious kingdom transformed into disfigured golems. When the final cacophony of the Golden Night faded to calm, the Harmost Boethius lay amidst the rubble. Only the rubble heard his insensate mumblings, and only the debris recorded the sin of treachery. In a moment of madness, he betrayed us all. Order will not easily change, nor will human regrets. Golden Troupe's Reward. An ancient crown that resembles a stage prop more than it does some suzerain's headgear. In the solemn silence of the sea's depths, the towering city of the glorious kingdom once stood, and there, like the sad ghost of a mighty, ancient dream, there stands a faded golden castle. The majestic opera of that golden era has ended, and its harmonious, united music no longer echoes. Upon the wreckage of ambition and betrayal, the people of bygone times built a realm anew. Woe, woe to the perfect order that has once again been trampled by barbarity. The weak and benighted have overtaken the Empire's ancient lands. The spirits in the springs and the chevaliers, the ravings of children have replaced the epic poems, slipshod ditties have supplanted music. The eternal majesty was ruined by a moment of the God King's madness, and the resurgent savages scorn its memory. Must great realms be reclaimed by savagery in the end? In the end, shall folly and ignorance prevail over civilization and reason? Upon the golden theater in that faded castle, thus did musicians who had lost their score cry lamentation for a past that would never return, and the silent, famished golems listened, waiting to hunt and devour the innocent souls. When the great golden symphony plays once more, the Golden Troupe will receive the rightful rewards owed to the true and loyal. When the perfect order separates humanity into master and servant, prosperity and beauty shall make the kingdom glorious once more. Abide until that day, when every member of the Golden Troupe shall win the whole future as their prize. Welcome back. This artifact set drops along with the Marachuse Phantom set from the domain called the Denouement of Sin. This domain actually is rather unique, as it's the first one that, rather than having 5 hanging crowns, which we theory crafters have long theorized represent the primordial one and the 4 shades, it has double that number. At first this made me laugh. I thought, oh, now Hoyoverse is just screwing with us. But if you think about the fact that this very artifact set comes from this domain, it's not surprising at all. I theorized a while ago that the God King Remus's elevation of 4 Harmosts, the Golden Troupe, for which this set is named, was Remus's attempt at emulating the primordial one. What lore we have about him suggests that he could be around as old as King Deshret and Nabu Malikata, who we more or less can confirm were alive during the tail end of the Primordial One's reign. Nabu Malikata especially lived during the Celestial Envoy era, the time when the Seelie race served as the Primordial One's envoys to mankind. This was before she became known as the Goddess of Flowers once the Seelie race was banished and cursed. Right from the start, this artifact set introduces us to the themes of Remurian civilization. The musician in the first piece, Golden Song's Variation, is later called Boethius. The Golden Troupe itself consisted of 4 chosen harmosts, who Remus gave his own power, and more importantly, specifically his authority, the power of the gods. This was also considered his sin and why the Empire would eventually fall. Remus wanted to grant immortality to all the people who fell under the banner of his empire, and to do so created a golden ichor from the primordial sea and a stone of immortality, likely a reference to the Philosopher's Stone of Hermetic alchemy, as it's turned up in a few places in Fontaine so far. This also ended in him making creepy golems to trap people's souls in, but we know very little about that practice up until this point. Much like the sin attributed to Egeria later, Remus's actions were considered breaking a taboo by Celestia, and Remus's civilization was doomed to be destroyed. In his attempt to subvert the Doomsday Prophecy from his own time, King Remus only sealed the fate of his realm. Again, this shows us the cyclical nature of Teyvat in the way that we also only hastened the coming of the prophecy by bringing Farina to trial. The 4 elemental circlet artifacts tell of world cycles, each ending in elemental disasters, and suggesting that the final one was the Diluvian period, a time of great floods that destroyed the first civilization, what we commonly refer to as the unified civilization that was built by the Primordial One. The book series, The History of the Decline and Fall of Remuria, is a 6-book series, but only 3 are in-game currently. It speaks of this time period and says that the rise and fall of Gurabad had already occurred before the god King Remus descended to a place called Meropes, likely near the current location of the fortress of Meripede, and founded civilization. The god King Remus descended on the Fortuna. While we don't know exactly what the Fortuna was, we can assume it was some kind of flying ship, as it directly inspired Wriothesley's flagship, the Wingalet. His arrival, happening in the very place that the fortress of Meripede would one day exist, is also fascinating. The artifact set even mentions the Valley of the Exiles later on in the timeline, suggesting that this practice existed even before Egeria. There is more on this in the description of Neuvillette's signature weapon, the Tome of the Eternal Flow, though it only mentions the time period of Meripede's founding from the time of Egeria's rule. This is another nod to the ongoing subtle plot threads we get in every region where 1 or 2 or even a handful of characters are shown to have ties to heroes and villains from the past. Our most obvious references are Cyno with the priest of Deshret, Kassala, and Diluc, who is the spitting image of the original Dawn Knight from the time of Venti's first rebellion against Decarabian. Again, in a more breadcrumb fashion, Sumeru gave us Alhaitham, who shares a motif with one of Deshret's successors, Ormazd, who was the lover of the Jinn Lilupar. The hidden murals in the ruins of the city bear the same symbol that is on Alhaitham's chest. Who's looking there? What are you talking about? This is for academic purposes. I think this is a sign of the continued blink or you'll miss it trail of hints about Teyvat's cycle of death and rebirth as well. At the time of Ormazd's reign, Deshret's forbidden knowledge disaster had not yet occurred, and he could be considered an overarching force, despite having abdicated his throne and disappeared. Kaveh can also be mentioned, as the name of his constellation, the Bird of Paradise, is a direct reference to the Goddess of Flowers, Nabu Malikata, and all of his design motifs and color schemes match with the motifs and colors used in the part of the desert specifically relating directly to King Deshret. All this despite Kaveh having no direct tie to the desert or desert people. Okay, winding our way back to the Golden Troupe itself. The last artifact piece seems to suggest that Remuria, and in turn its god king, believed its power and righteousness stemmed from the idea that certain people were lesser, that society ought to be separated into master and slave, which is pretty disturbing to say the least. I find it interesting that a lot of the time when we're presented these fallen ancient civilizations, The supposed sin that they're struck down for is often a lot less ugly than some of their other belief systems, but, in a fantasy setting, things can always be worse. Amongst the God King's sins, the most terrible was the attempt to pass power that should have been reserved for the godly domain to humans. Celestia's priorities are questionable. While what we have to go off of is a bit vague, the fact that Fontaine has been destroyed by a great flood more than once in its past is pretty well documented. There's also several other factors that come to mind that make the Fontainian Plateau one of the more interesting features of Teyvat for me. First of all, its proximity to Celestia speaks for itself. What is down there? I'm dying to know. The second is the fact that its landscape seems to be, at least of 4.2, almost entirely free of the basic ruins we usually attribute to Conria. The first book in the Decline and Fall of Remuria series mentions that their kindred of the Far East reached the rim of the high waters, suggesting that people from Sumeru found their way onto the Fontainian Plateau at some point before Fontainian civilization had truly taken off. This tiny tidbit is pretty interesting because it tells us that it was probably considered pretty difficult to do so as far as feats go. I mean, you can see in-game how massive the waterfalls surrounding the plateau are, and how isolated any native people of the realm would be without any of their modern harbors, which are really just giant lifts in place. There are hints all over Fontaine of how isolated it was in comparison to the rest of Teyvat. One of the many things I noted being the complete absence of the type of ruins Hoyoverse has used up until now to denote Conria's presence in an area. Of course, they were, at first, the only ancient ruin asset used in the game, littering Mondstadt and Liyue, and even Tsurumi Island and Arami in Inazuma, but in Sumeru were used almost specifically to delineate ruins associated with the Dari. Only upon coming closer to the physical location of an actual entrance to Conria did these ruins change to be more similar to the unified civilization ones found in Enkanomiya and the Chasm. So, coming to Fontaine and finding not even a single hint of this aside from one unified civilization ruin was pretty shocking, and I feel was a very intentional choice. I add that the one small unified civilization ruin there is to be found on the southwestern edge of Elenis, which is in the direction of Sumeru. The ruins we find everywhere in Fontaine are not even necessarily Remurian in nature. These white and gold ruins are from the era of Fontaine just before the Calamity 500 years ago, and Remuria predates that by a lot. While Remuria continues to influence Fontainian culture to an extent even in the current era, the pre-Calamity Fontaine was likely more so. As of yet, we do not know exactly when Egeria rose to power and how long she and her Lockfolk and Lock Knights existed before that. If we had a timeline for her birth, we'd know more accurately when the original sovereign of Hydra was cut off from the Primordial Sea, and likely answer other questions, such as whether or not that coincided with the sovereign's death. The only thing we know for sure about the timeline of Egeria's birth is that she was created by the Shade of Life, one of the Primordial One's shades, which suggests she was likely born before the battle with the Second Who Came. The only shade we know was active after that was Istaroth, who was with Enkanomiya in the aftermath, but would later end up in Mondstadt somehow. So, unless we assume that Istaroth was still around specifically because she was shielded from the oncoming battle with the Second Who Came because she fell into whatever hole Enkanomiya sank into, it actually doesn't tell us that much concrete at all, unfortunately. We know that Remus had a connection to a great dragon from the abyssal depths that supposedly bowed to his will, and that later on, the fell Dragon King / Prince Skyla is mentioned as rallying the Vishops and Barbarian tribes to fight against Remus, their attack coinciding with Remuria's Capitolium being swallowed by the depths. Skyla was eventually sealed beneath the Tower of Remuria before the end, leaving the question as to whether or not he was the original sovereign up in the air. We still have a lot of questions to be answered in this patch cycle, and while we're going to have to wait for a lot of them, we can hope a few more books and perhaps the new artifact sets on its way will have more for us to dissect. I'm sure we'll get to visit some of the ruins of Remuria much in the same fashion we got to eventually see the Eternal Oasis and the Desert of Faraket. We rarely get anything teased so blatantly without it being a direct through line to a future adventure. So, until then, we have these artifacts and countless breadcrumbs scattered throughout Fontaine to whet our appetites. What do you guys think? Will we see the ruins of Remuria in the future map expansions? Maybe learn the fate of the dragon named Skyla and confirm his identity. We'll just have to keep playing to find out. Until then, this is the Hexen Zircles signing off. We hope you'll join us on our next adventure.